When you've done that, you need to write down what you think the teacher believes about language learning. What's the teacher's belief about why this was a success? What is it that happened that the teacher believes is successful? And the next thing I'd like you to tell me is, do you agree with that belief? And would you do the same? And here's a question which we may or may not answer in this talk, but if you see a teaching activity, or if someone, for example, introduces you to a new piece of technology, as Hanya did this morning, one reaction is, I want to try it. But another typical reaction was the one you were talking about, which is, stay away from me. But if you have the stay away, I don't like that activity, then there is a penalty. And it's this. If you say, well, I've just seen someone talking about teaching and I didn't like what I saw, I would never use that activity. The challenge is, okay, just by changing one thing, could you use it? Because it's a terribly, terribly dangerous thing to do, to come up with the kind of resistance that you were talking about this afternoon, Professor. It just doesn't work. Okay, here we go. So that's the penalty. You have to, the no option is you have to come up with a way of changing what you see in order to use it. Right, now, the thing is, we've got 60 minutes. And boy, we've now got 53 minutes. 50 minutes? So I don't know how far we're going to get. As it happens, I've got 74 of these interviews so far, but they're not all in this talk. Don't panic. It's because that'd be long. But, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm not quite sure. So what we'll do is I'd like to ask you, there are 4 possible little collections of interviews. Which one would you like to watch first? Just have a look. I mean, it's a bit silly, but just choose some names. The one with Beja in it? Beja in this? Okay, right you are. Let's have a look at that. Let's have a look. Here we go. Right. Come on, computer. Thank you. Wait. I didn't ask you to start yet. We're going here, aren't we? This is the one, yeah. Okay, so this is Andrea. She's a teacher in a school. There'll be 2 or 3 of them here. She's a teacher in a private language school in Bucharest, in Romania. Okay? Here we go.
And one activity that was particularly successful was an activity for the first conditional. I showed them a picture of a man sitting in a pub, and we first talked about the picture and what is the man doing, what's his name, how do we call it, how should we call him, stuff like that. And then in groups they were supposed to write first conditional sentences in order to make a story. If he keeps on drinking, he'll get drunk. If he gets drunk, he won't be able to go home. If he doesn't get home, his wife will leave him, and they had to continue the story. And at the end we had 4 stories, all of them tragical, and they thought it was a lot of fun, and they just liked it.
Thank you very much.
So that's Andrea. Would you just like to make notes? And remember, if you couldn't use that lesson, and I'm guessing there's a reason why quite a lot of you couldn't use that lesson, just think of how you could change it to use it. Make some notes very quickly, okay? Right, that's Andrea. Here's I think it's Claire next, isn't it? Claire, let's see. Yes, this is Claire. She teaches at International House in Newcastle in the north of England. Here we go. Here's Claire.
A good lesson that I've done in the last year was based on superheroes, and it was to revise conditionals. So first of all, you start with a picture kind of round where they have to name the superhero. Then they brainstorm in groups superpowers, superhuman powers.
We're talking about people like Superman and Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spider-Man, Superman, all these, Batman. They brainstorm superhuman powers like kind of super strength, flying, invisibility, things like that. You then write, or you can get them to write one on a bit of paper, and then you give them out to each group. So each group has one superpower. And they have about 15 or 20 minutes to come up with reasons of why that would be a really good superpower to have. what you could do with it. So, for example, if I could fly, I would visit all the cities in the world in one day, things like that. They then have to present as a group to the class about why that would be a great superpower to have. You could then, either at the end or then, you could feed in error correction stage. And finally, the class votes on the best superpower. That's it, really.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So that's Claire. So if you want to make some notes, by all means do. Who's next? There are 4 in this little sequence. There are 4. Who's next? This is in the south of Romania on the Danube Delta. This is a bit of a problem. I'm going to have to tell you a story for you to understand this. It's a story about Jesse, a boy called Jesse and the shark. Do you know this story? There's a boy called Jesse Arbogast. One or two of you know these stories. I'll do it as quickly as I can. One evening, he was on holiday in Florida with his aunt and his uncle, and they were on the beach, and it was a beautiful day on the beach, and it was just getting to the stage where the sun was beginning to gently slide off the sky, and it was on its way down. And little Jesse, 8-year-old Jesse, decided that he would go for one last little swim in the sea, okay? So he went into the sea, and his aunt and his uncle were kind of sitting on the beach, happy, and suddenly, to the uncle's absolute shock, they saw swimming through the shallows a great big fin. And they screamed, but it was too late because an 8-foot bull shark went up to Jesse and tore off his arm. And the boy fell into the sea. But luckily the uncle was watching, so the uncle went charging into the sea and he picked Jesse up, and Jesse now only had one arm, not two, and there was blood pouring everywhere, and they brought Jesse back onto the beach, and Jesse was dying. He was about to die. He wasn't breathing anymore. Luckily, however, his aunt had been trained in what's it called? Cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, mouth to mouth. She gave him mouth to mouth, and she got him breathing again. So Jesse was breathing, and they called 911 on their cellular phones, and luckily, there was a helicopter, a Medivac helicopter in the region, and so it made its way towards Jesse on the beach. And was the boy going to live? The uncle looked towards the sea. Can you imagine what he saw? He saw the shark swimming around in the sea with a huge big smile on its face. Because on the whole, he just had a nice dinner. And then the uncle did something quite truly amazing. Do you know what he did? He went into the sea, he walked into the sea, he ran into the sea, he waded into the sea. This is a true story. He waded into the sea, he picked up the shark like this, and he carried it back to the beach, and he threw it down on the beach, and then a park ranger, you know the guys with the hats, and a park ranger came along and he pulled out his gun, because everyone in America's got a gun. He pulled out his gun, boom, 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 like this, and the shark was, well, it didn't kill the shark, but it gave him a bad headache, and it was awful. And then, well, I don't know if you know about Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria was the Queen of England sometime years ago, and the Empress of India, which the Indians on the whole weren't terribly keen on, but that's neither here nor there. She was the Queen of England, and she was a bit of a funny old thing, and one of her beliefs was that if you went, oh gosh, Skype's still on. One of her beliefs was that if you go to dinner with her, before you swallow your food, you have to chew for 35 times. Apparently that's good manners. Or was in 1890 in Buckingham Palace or wherever they lived. Luckily, sharks and lions and things like that have never heard of Queen Victoria, because then the result is that they don't chew at all. They just bite and swallow. So one of the park rangers, he got his baton, they prized, which I think takes some courage, they prized the shark's mouth open, and they put the baton in the middle, and then they went, and they found right down there in the stomach, what do you think they found? Jesse's little arm, and they went, and there came the arm, and they put Jesse and the arm and the aunt and the uncle, and they all went off to Pensacola, a place called Pensacola, where in an operation, an Irish surgeon called Dr. Ian Rogers sewed Jesse's arm back on. And of course, the media, that's where I heard this story. I found it in one of my newspapers. The media went to Jesse's uncle. They really, really wanted to talk to him. And the question they wanted to ask was, what's the question you want to ask Jesse's uncle? How did you have the courage, that's the word I was looking for. How did you have the courage? To do that? And his reply was very interesting. He said, well, I was mad. You know, American mad, as in just mad. And you can do some crazy things when you're mad. It's extraordinary. Well, anyway, that's the story of Jesse. And I had to tell you that because this is what Carmen is talking about. Here we go.
Last week I taught conditionals type 3, and I used one of your ideas in my lesson, the story of Jessica who lost an arm in a shark attack. And it was great because the story was totally bewildering for my students who couldn't believe their eyes and ears, because I showed also some pictures of the guy, which I downloaded from the internet. And nobody believed it was a true story, really. And then they went home, they searched on the internet, and the next session that we had, next class, they came back and they said, yes, you're right, now we trust you more. I told them the story, then I asked them to tell me if they had any questions. Afterwards, I used the if, to change kind of parts of the story, what would have happened if he hadn't gone into the sea that day, and so on and so forth. Then in groups of 4, I think, or 5, I asked them to kind of stage that day, to get into his shoes, and some of them were the doctors, some of them were the relatives, and so on and so forth. And they kind of enjoyed this activity because they felt engaged in what they were doing. And then I asked them to do as homework, kind of rewrite his story based on what they have experienced in class.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, one of the advantages of the flip cam is that it's instant. One of the disadvantages is it doesn't have an external microphone. So you have to get very close to someone, and then you hear lots of background noise. Anyway, one more to come, and then one more to come. Okay, this was at the TESOL conference last year again.
I used an activity, actually. Basically, the students liked the activity, which was writing a ransom note. Using the first conditional, and it really worked well, and it made my students to practice the situation in context. There was a girl in the lesson, in the particular lesson, and she was kidnapped, and they wrote ransom notes to the parents of the girl, and they said, for example, if you call the police, we will kill the girl. Some sentences like that, and they were really creative. I brought some newspapers to the classroom, and they cut and pasted the letters,